In ancient Rome, the Colosseum stood as the ultimate arena of strength and spectacle, a place where warriors clashed for fame, freedom, or even their lives. Throughout their history, the Romans developed a wide variety of gladiator classes, each with different weapons, armor, tactics, and origins. Today, we're taking a look back at 10 types of gladiators who looked death in the eye every time they stepped onto the sands of the arena. If you want a little more context on the Colosseum, check out my last video where I cover its first 100 days, a grand opening event like nothing else in history. But without further ado, let's get into the gladiators. The Murmillo, perhaps the most recognizable of the gladiator classes, the name Murmillo comes from the Greek word for fish, referencing the fish-shaped crest on their helmets. Murmillos represented the Roman ideal of a disciplined, heavily armed soldier, and their look and fighting style mirrored those of the Roman military. Towering behind large rectangular shields, called scutums, and gripping the iconic Roman gladius, the Murmillo was the ideal image of Roman military strength. Inspired by the gear of the legionaries and early enemies such as the Gauls, his armor was a walking tribute to Rome's conquest. When a Murmillo stepped into the sand, he didn't just fight, he represented the might of the Roman war machine. It was common for Murmillos to be pitted against smaller opponents, such as Thracians or Retiariuses. A famous Murmillo was Marcus Attalus, who in his maiden fight managed to defeat a gladiator from Nero's own personal guard, who had a 12-2 record. Attalus then followed up with a victory over the 13-1 Lucius Felix. Not bad for a rookie. This gladiator class has stood the test of time, as the Murmillo is often seen as the iconic version of the classic gladiator. Among renowned gladiator types, the Thraex or the Thracian stands out as another of the most iconic. Immortalized through the legendary story of Spartacus, the Thracian slave turned rebel leader gathered an army of 70,000 and led an uprising against the Roman Republic, winning several battles during the Third Servile War, until his eventual defeat. Fast, nimble, and deadly, the Thraex was Rome's interpretation of a Thracian warrior from the Balkans. These gladiators wielded a curved sword known as a sicca, perfect for slipping behind shields or slashing exposed limbs. Their small rectangular shield offered speed over defense, and their high-crested helmet often featured a bird or a griffin, adding an exotic flair to their fighting style. In an interesting anecdote, Thraex gladiators were said to be very popular among the ladies, but often died gruesome deaths due to their lack of armor or proper training. Thraex gladiators were often pitted against Murmillos, turning each duel into a symbolic clash of imperial order against tribal resistance. No helmet, no shield, just a net, a trident, and a dagger. The Retiarius gladiator stood out in every way. Inspired by coastal fishermen, this lightly armed gladiator was one of the most unique to ever step into the arena. He wore minimal armor and was easily identified by his net and trident. His only protection was a leather arm guard called a manichaea and a shoulder plate called the Gladiator to deflect downward strikes. He'd throw his net in a sweeping motion to entangle his enemy. If it landed, the trident followed in fast. If not, he had to improvise, dodging, weaving, and relying on his dagger for a close finish. The Retiarius were trained separately from the sword and shield classes and often endured worse conditions. Seen as effeminate and dishonorable, they were frequently mocked. The poet Juvenal even told a story of Gracchus, a Roman aristocrat who brought disgrace by becoming a Retiarius. Still, the Retiarius gladiator captured the crowd's attention with his speed, strategy, and flair, especially when facing his natural nemesis, the Sucator. Mocked by some, but every time that net and trident combo entered the arena, the crowd knew they were watching one of the arena's most unpredictable duels. Enter the Sucator, Latin for pursuer. This gladiator was purpose-built to counter the Retiarius. His helmet was smooth and rounded, with two tiny eye holes, specifically designed to prevent the net from catching. Similar in gear to the Murmillo, Sucators carried a gladius and a large shield. Heavily armored, they absorbed attacks and closed the distance to crush their quicker opponent. A typical match might start with the Retiarius at a distance, sometimes even positioned on a platform above water, armed with rocks and a trident to keep the Sucator at bay. Kinda like a real-life Donkey Kong versus Mario, the Sucator had to avoid the projectiles, nets, and jabs to get within striking range. While they had the advantage of armor, Sucators tired quickly under the weight of the armor. Still, their duels with the Retiarius were Roman blood sport at its finest, discipline versus deception. Even Emperor Commodus famously fought as a Sucator, though he heavily rigged the fights to ensure his victory. Another legendary succator was Flamia, a Syrian-born fighter who wore armor styled after the Gaulish warriors. Flamia fought a total of 34 times with a record of 21 wins, 9 draws, and 4 losses. Remarkably, he was offered freedom 4 times and refused each time. It was clear in his eyes, and the crowd's, that being a succator and watching one was a damn good time. The Samnite was one of the earliest gladiator classes, named after the tribe that once brought the early city of Rome to its knees. The Samnite wielded a curved shield, gladius, and plumed helmet. The Samnite's gear symbolized Rome's early wars for survival. These warriors hailed from Samaria, a region of southern Italy. When the Romans conquered them, they forced the captured Samnites into mock battles in the arena, fighting either one another or opponents dressed as Roman legionaries, the early version of the Murmillo. These matches reenacted Rome's victories over tribal foes and served as propaganda. Eventually, as the Samnites were fully conquered and assimilated, the class faded from popularity, but their style lived on in later gladiator types like the Succator, Murmillo, and the Hippocampius. The Hoplocampius gladiator was a throwback to a different ancient civilization. Inspired by Greek hoplites, he fought with a spear, dagger, and round shield. His tall, feathered helmet gave him a distinct and elegant silhouette in the arena. The Hoplocampius faced off against Murmillos or Thracians, turning each duel into a symbolic retelling of Rome's conquest of the Greek world. These matchups pitted tactics against brute strength, phalanx style elegance against raw Roman power. While not as popular as other classes, the Hoplocampius certainly would have been more popular in the East or newly occupied Greek territories to remind the Greeks just what happens when they faced off against the might of Rome. Unlike most gladiators, who fought gladiators of different class types, the provocateur or the challenger only fought other provocateurs. Why? Because these matches were often personal challenges, rivalries between gladiator schools, feuds between fighters, or grudge matches to settle scores and prove status. Provocateurs wore full breastplate armor, unusual for most gladiators, along with a helmet, a gladius, and the large rectangular shield known as a scutum. This heavy armor made them hard to injure but quick to tire. Their duels looked more like disciplined military drills than chaotic bloodbaths, with precision and strategy taking center stage. They represented military honor, discipline, and eternal conflict. Formal duels played out in front of roaring crowds. For the audience, it was a chance to see what happened when equals clashed. The provocateur matches were the closest thing Rome had to modern-day combat sports, often not ending in death, but a clear victory or concession. It was about testing skill on an even playing field, and proving who was truly the better man. The Equites. Not to be confused with Rome's noble cavalrymen, the Equites were entertainers. Gladiatorial Equites began matches on horseback, armed with lances, circling the arena before dismounting to fight with swords and shields. They wore lighter armor for speed and agility. Their matches were clean, often choreographed, and usually opened up the afternoon games. Inspired by Rome's equestrian class, their duels added elegance and athleticism before the bloodier battles to begin. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of a knightly joust. Unlike other gladiators, the bestiari fought not men, but animals. Roman emperors often imported lions, tigers, bears, elephants, and all sorts of animals from Africa and Asia to display their wealth and thrill the crowds at the Colosseum. There were 2 types of bestiaries: the daimeo albestias, criminals condemned to die horribly in the arena, and the ventio, trained gladiators who hunted wild beasts for sport. Those sentenced to death were not considered true gladiators. They were the lowest class of people in ancient Rome, and their death was to entertain the crowd. And a single beast could kill dozens of them at a time. The vantario, on the other hand, were indeed trained gladiators who hunted animals for the crowd as part of their performance. There are very few known ventio that have been recorded in history. The most famous example of one of these gladiators is Carporius, who is said to have killed 20 animals with his bare hands. The Roman poet Martial even quipped that he could have handled the Hydra, the Chimera, and the fire-eating bulls all at the same time. Even several emperors attempted to show off their skills by killing animals as bestiari. Although, rather than impress the crowds, it actually often damaged their popularity. Nero fought animals in the arena, while Commodus not so heroically fought injured and immobile animals from a safe, raised platform, much to the disgust of the Senate. These beast battles were perhaps the most dangerous spectacles in all of the games, unpredictable, savage, and often the final performance for many a gladiator. The Democritus entered the arena like a storm, wielding 2 curved swords with no shield and minimal armor. Likely inspired by Eastern mercenaries or street fighters, the Democritus relied on speed, chaos, and relentless offense. Their popularity peaked between the 2nd and 4th centuries AD, though traditional Romans often saw them as underhanded and foreign due to their Eastern inspiration. These gladiators were typically pitted against more heavily armored foes, making each duel a deadly contrast of agility versus defense. Rare in the arena, but never forgettable, the Democritus brought fury and flair to the floor of the Colosseum. Among the rarest and most controversial gladiators in the arena is our bonus entry for today, the Gladiator X. Yes, female gladiators were real, but rare, poorly documented, and controversial even in their own time. They stirred up fascination, outrage, and scandal wherever they appeared. A Gladiator X would wear very little armor, be bare-chested, and in many cases not even wear a helmet, her gender deliberately on display for extra spectacle. Armed with whatever they could get their hands on, these women wouldn't just fight other women, but in some cases would fight dwarves to heighten the absurdity and shock. The crowd loved the novelty. The Senate, not so much. Writers like Juvenal and Cassius Dio were quick to criticize these female fighters as vulgar or indecent, claiming their battles violated the natural order of things. And yet, some Gladiator X's came from noble families, aristocrat women who rejected Roman decorum and chose blood and glory in the arena. A literal throwdown of the corset for the sword. But Rome's appetite for spectacle had its limits, and in 200 AD, Emperor Septimus Severus banned female gladiators from participation in the games altogether, citing the scandal it caused among the elite. Still, their legacy survives, shrouded in mystery, filtered through scandal and satire. The earliest known use of the word Gladiator X doesn't even appear until the 4th century in a brief notation of Juvenal's commentary on the legendary female beast hunter known as Mevia. These female gladiators were never common, and their presence in the arena was brief, but they remain a reminder of just how far Rome would go to captivate a crowd. So that'll do it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and like, subscribe, and comment with your favorite gladiator class. And as always, take it easy and have a great day.